I'm here to tell you why Florida State is well on its way to having a top 10 recruiting class.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into another episode of Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for everyone that checks out this show whenever they can. You can find us wherever you get your podcast for free and on YouTube, part of the awesome Locked On Network, your team every day. Today's episode, I'm going to break down why Florida State has an excellent chance to have another top 10 recruiting class. We're going to start off with the kids that are committed and also talk about some of the players that I have recently communicated with and or seen live playing 7-on-7, etc. So let's get into it. Number one, we need to discuss the kids that are already committed just to make sure everybody's up to date where that stands and why they have a chance to add. And then I got a whole bunch of notes right over here on my pad. Make sure I don't miss anybody, and we'll go over those. First off, Solomon Thomas is still committed to the Noles. Just so you remember, elite offensive lineman. He is a five-star talent out of Jacksonville Reigns. That young man still has schools from across the country coming at him, but Florida State is definitely the team to beat. I think he's a young man that can play early, 6'4", 310 pounds, and it's just a powerhouse. Young man will obviously be recruited very highly if you followed his recruitment at all until he signs. There's just not a lot of guys like him, his frame and everything else. I expect him to compete early at Florida State. At quarterback, it's a little bit surprising that he doesn't get more respect, in my opinion. That's Tramel Jones. He's from another high school in Jacksonville. He plays at Mandarin. He's teammates with Jamie French, who I will discuss in a little bit. But this is a kid that's really good, and he's gotten not enough pub, in my opinion. So quarterback, they took him early before his junior year, and he's gotten a lot better over time, and he's mobile. He can throw it on the run. He can play from the pocket, and just a good dude. He's the kind of guy you want to be around, so I'm really happy for Tramel that he's going to end up at Florida State. This is where it gets interesting because the other two kids, some people know about, some don't, one of which I've gotten to know very well, and that's Javion Hilson. He is a defensive end out of Cocoa, which is a famous program here in the state of Florida, but at the same time, not necessarily everybody knows a ton about him because he's a real quiet guy. But 6'3.5", 6'4", he's up to 233. I spoke to him on Sunday. He was at a tournament in Atlanta doing our 5-on-5, and he was dominant. He is just very naturally twitchy, off the edge, stays low, bends around the corner, all the things that either you're just God-given ability or you don't. He has it, and he also has a will, too. He's the young man that when it's Friday night and it's an opportunity to go out and hang out with his friends, he's just as likely, for what I'm told and from what I've seen directly, to go work out. Not a lot of teenagers are like that. He has a little bit different drive. Quiet is one thing. Driven is quite another. Javion Hilson, again, 6'3.5", 6'4", 233 pounds. He is shot out of a cannon. And Florida State has needed more edge rushers like this for a long time, but out of high school, not the portal. You need kids that you develop all the way through if you want to really maximize. And this is the kind of kid they got to get. He has a chance to be a five-star. He's right on that border with some of the services like Rivals 247. I expect him, based on what I've seen here recently, to end up at that level, but that's just my opinion. Another kid from the greater Central Florida area that doesn't get enough respect is Ethan Pritchard. He's a linebacker committed to the Noles. Think old school Florida State. 6'2", 195, 200 pounds, somewhere in that range. Can really move in space, can help you as the overhang linebacker, hence the hybrid. He's a young man that also has the ability to play in space and drop back into coverage and be impactful. Most linebackers, quite honestly, can't cover hardly at all. This is a kid that kind of fits that role. 25, 30 years ago, a lot of teams probably would have played Ethan at strong safety. And that's cool too. He could probably play it. But moving down into the box, getting a little bigger, I'd imagine he'll be 220. That's a young man I think that Florida State can use in their nickel package, dime, etc. He's underrated, like he's a 3-star on 24/7, whatever. But at the same time, he's a kid that I think is really good. He plays at Seminole High School, which also helps. Like Cocoa, one of the more famous programs in Central Florida, always competitive. They've both won recent state championships for a reason. They got a lot of talent. So those are the four kids that are committed. But I also want to go down just from quarterback through tight end today and talk a little bit about the opportunities that Florida State has to add. These are just some This is by no means a complete list. So here we go with it as well. I'm going to start with offensive line because this is something that Florida State has struggled with, in my opinion, out of the high school ranks in terms of truly flat-out elite kids. And again, they got Solomon Thomas. Doesn't get much better than that already in, but they got a chance to have a special O-line class. I could do this whole podcast just on offensive line. I've been chatting with Ziyare Addison. It's a kid I'm going to talk a little bit about here in a second. Like, he's a kid that has 40 offers. He just set up an official visit with Florida State. He told me about, I posted it on my Twitter, but like, these are the kinds of kids that if you can get them in your program over time, you will improve it vastly and you don't have to rely on the portal. While it's good they get guys, it's still better to get the high school kids if at all possible. So let's just start with Ziyare. 6'5", 280, very lean, very athletic. The video that I put up of the 5-on-5 tournament, he's number 58 in that. Really, really, really good player. I mean, everybody that you can basically imagine is offered for the most part. And he's got Clemson, he's got Florida State and Oregon as his 3 visits. Florida State will be June 14th. Clemson is May 31st, and Oregon is June 7th. He's going to take more visits. He doesn't know where he's going yet. He's just honestly looking at it openly. But this is a national top 100 type of talent, in my opinion. And it's a kid that has played basketball, has been a defensive end, transitioned to offensive tackle, and just has really good feet. Needs to add strength like every other offensive lineman coming out of high school. Even Solomon Thomas will need to add strength. But he can play left tackle. He can play across the board as well. When you have young men that can play multiple spots, that is very advantageous for your football team. So Ziyare doesn't know where he's going, but that's a kid that the Noles have a great shot at. And if they could get him, especially being an in-state kid, he lives just south of Tampa, goes to Sumner High School. That's always a nice bonus for Florida State as well. Staying with the offensive line, there's another tackle that when I recently communicated with him into last week, Mario Nash. I've mentioned him on this show before, and I will mention him probably quite a few more times if it goes well for Florida State. He's out of Mississippi, big-time program or big-time player at a small school program, which is typical of Mississippi. And I love these kids. Like, they're just the most humble kids. Like Mississippi, there's a reason Norvell and his staff recruits that state. Tons of talent. Kids are easygoing. I love those players. Nash is probably about as natural a pass protector in the class of 25. I saw him at the Under Armour event in Georgia. I thought he was the best offensive lineman there in one-on-ones, and so did some other people. He earned some O-line MVP awards, depending on which network, et cetera, you want to talk about. He's going to probably officially visit Florida State. If they somehow ended up with Solomon Thomas, Ziyare, and this kid, you can call it a day. I mean, it'd be short numbers-wise maybe, but I mean, that would be 3 elite players. And that's realistically something that could happen. They also have a shot at a few other kids as well, like Max Buchanan. He's another kid that was on that film. He played right guard. That's an athlete that not many people have taken as seriously as they probably should. He's also from the same high school as Pritchard, plays at Seminole, just outside of Orlando. He has no idea where he's going. He's going to take all his trips. Florida State will be one of them, but they're in the mix. Another really good kid in terms of his pass protection, especially unusual for an offensive lineman that plays on the interior. Max, good player. And then finally, there's 2 kids from Fairburn, Georgia, just south of Atlanta, and Langston Hughes. This is a program that has always got kids. Tavares Dice is an offensive tackle. He was just there on an unofficial visit. While he was on his visit, he had a good time, and he was talking to Atkins and everybody. But he also was talking to Dontrell Glover. Atkins had Dice call him, and they chopped it up. And I thought Dontrell was the best offensive lineman or lineman pretty much in general at the camp this past weekend. He is 6'3.5", 311 pounds, and just power, just raw power. But he has good feet. He can move in space, and once he gets his hands on you, it's pretty much over. Very few exceptions to that. If Florida State could get one or both of them, again, you're talking about adding elite level talent to your program. And, Georgia's after Dontrell, Tennessee's after Dontrell, et cetera. Like, he has big name schools coming after him. That's important. But Dice can play tackle or guard, probably going to end up at tackle. He's a lot like Ziyare in terms of his frame. He's 293, athletic. He could probably end up playing all 5 like Ziyare if he really wanted to. And this is, again, the opportunity to move guys around if you have injuries. That's really important. So first thing I wanted to talk about was the basics of who they have committed and then this O-line, because it's always something that Florida State's needed to get better over the last, 5-6 years. They're headed in the right direction, and it's a prime reason, again, that I truly believe Florida State's going to have another top 10 recruiting class. With that, next up, we're going to talk about receivers. And to say the least, Florida State has a ton of receivers that are going to be an opportunity to come to Florida State. Right now, let's talk a little bit about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Over 122 million parts keep your number one ride or die alive. You always find exactly what you're looking for. At eBay, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, now let's talk a little bit about receiver. Even for the state of Florida, which is obviously famous for the wide receiver position, I mean, the list is insane. This is a very good group in state. I mentioned earlier that Trammell is from Mandarin High School in Jacksonville. He's committed to the Noles. He's the quarterback. One of his good buddies is Jamie French. Every time I see Trammell, I always joke with him, I know you're recruiting Jamie to come play with you. I'm not even going to ask you about it. I mean, we just laugh because obviously he is. Jamie's a top 5 receiver by anybody's board nationally. He just visited LSU. He's setting up an official visit there. Look for Ohio State and Miami to be other major players. And I think Florida State is the other one. I have no idea where he's going to go. And I really don't think, based on everything that I found out, and I have some pretty good connections around him, that he knows either. This is going to be a very late decision for Jamie. I don't care if he commits early or not. I could care less. This will be a signing day deal, period. That's all I'm going to say on him until he signs. I don't care if he announces a leader publicly. Until it's signing day, I do not care. Everybody's coming after him. It's going to be a hard decision. He could go anywhere. He could go to Oregon. He could go to Notre Dame. He could go to Miami. He could go to Florida State. He could go anywhere. It is a very wide open recruitment. There's a couple of kids that I don't think people know a ton about, and I've only seen one of these kids like up close a couple of times, and he really interested me. That's Joshua Moore. He's from West Broward down in the Fort Lauderdale area. He is a grown man. Really impressed me at Under Armour down in Miami. And I'd seen him one other time, but that was just in an interview setting. I didn't realize how well he moved. Reminds me a lot of Hakeem Williams in terms of his body type. For those that are curious, he's over 200 pounds, 6'3" or so, almost identical to Hakeem at the same stage, ironically from the same county. And honestly, this is a guy I think you could even play in the slot at times. Florida State is in the mix. Miami really wants him. There's a ton of schools after this kid. I wouldn't be surprised at anywhere he went as well. But after seeing him at Under Armour, I wouldn't be surprised if like Georgia and Ohio State and a bunch of other schools came after him too. Really good football player. I'm sure they're going to try to get Cortez Mills. Everybody is, especially after his Under Armour performance. Kid out of Homestead. There's a couple other kids. Like I hadn't seen him live until then. He's just shot out of a cannon. Explosive as all get out. Cortez, in a lot of ways, I would put in the same category as Jamie. That's probably a signing day deal. I don't know on Moore. I don't know him as well as I do Jamie, but I would imagine with his recruitment, it's going to be pretty late too. A couple of the other kids to kind of mention right now, CJ Wiley. That's a kid I interviewed this past weekend at the Pylon Atlanta event. Plays at Milton High School. They won the 7A state title. Florida State is in the mix with him. He's a player that can go pretty much wherever he wants. Another big-bodied kid, very polished for his age. Playing in the Atlanta area, he certainly went up against top competition, and he plays with Cam Newton's 7-on team. Really good kid. He was at Auburn yesterday. He's making the rounds. Georgia's really hard after him. Another big-bodied kid that could play flanker, could play split end, whatever you wanted to do. Florida State is definitely in the mix. A couple of kids that I don't know where they're going to end up, but they've had them on campus and they're trying to get them back. Caleb Cunningham, another kid out of Mississippi, they're trying to get back. And they're also trying to get in on Kalik Lockett, I've seen him. He's explosive. He's out of the Dallas area. Holy cow, is that kid good. They're trying to get OBs out of those guys. At the end of the day, I don't know who they're going to get, but they're in on so many receivers, and this is only some of them. If you're not going to worry about a spot, receiver should be it. Florida State is in really good shape there because you're going to get somebody. And there's always a 3-star sleeper kid in Florida every year that kind of rises. And there's 2 or 3 of those guys. And I didn't even mention all the players here. Florida State's good to go at receiver. They're going to get somebody. Let's move to running back. There are 3 or 4 guys that I think are possibilities. Desenor as a kid is kind of an athlete that I think they could go after. He's a smaller running back that's probably not mentioned enough. He's in the Palm Beach County area. He's shot out of a cannon. But there's 3 main guys that are a little bigger backs that I think Florida State would like. I could be wrong on this, but this is what I think is probably going to happen. They're going to get visits from all these. First off is Byron Lewis. I know him well. He plays at American Heritage. He's a kid that stood out on a loaded team even when he was coming out of his freshman year. That's kind of hard to do at American Heritage. They've had kids for years, Florida State included, that are really good, like Brian Burns, etc. This is a young man that I think will pick Miami or Florida State. You can flip a coin. At the same time, schools like Wisconsin and, the schools up north, they're going to recruit him. He may be entertained by it. And there's some SEC schools too. But I think it'll be the Noles or the Canes. I joked with Byron about, you're going to commit to Miami today, or is it going to be Florida State tomorrow? And he just kind of laughed about it when I saw him at Under Armour. But he's 6 foot, just over 200 pounds, and he's a traditional downhill tailback. The Noles are in the mix for him because they need big running backs, and they're still trying to feature the running game. They're one of the few spread offenses that truly do a good job of doing that, and he would fit in well. Also, Osmond Croma. He knows Cam Davis very well. They're both from the Albany, Georgia area. He played at Lee County, and, of course, Doherty High School is where Cam went. They're kind of rival schools. He's very interested in Florida State. Auburn's getting ready to get a visit with him. Georgia is the school I've heard the most with him, but Florida State is right there. He's a do-it-all, catch the ball, run, block. He is the entirety of Lee County's offense, and Florida State is really after him. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where he went, but Georgia's always hard to beat for running backs in their own state, so we'll see. The Florida State-Georgia battles are about as good as the Florida State-Miami ones are in recruiting. Finally, Alvin Henderson out of Elba, Alabama. Auburn, Florida State, Miami, Alabama, Georgia. Those are some of the main guys in the recruitment here. But I don't know where he's going to go. I've heard Auburn forever, but he's still taking visits. Like he said, Miami is getting his last visit. I know FSU will get an OV. It's hard to say. They're going big game hunting, and I'm sure they've got a few other guys they're looking at, but those are the main 3. So with that, it is what it is. Running back recruiting, Florida State's done so well with the run game. I don't think they're going to have a hard time getting one of the 3, or if they expand their board a little bit, that's okay. They'll be just fine at running back. Next up, I'm going to talk about tight end and why that's still important, and then kind of an overview for what's coming up with recruiting overall. Right now, let's talk a little bit about FanDuel. FanDuel, if you're say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA tournament. I got a lot of love for the tournament personally because it's something I've watched my whole life. So believe me, I've had my own busted brackets. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, whatever you can think of, and you can pick them. Gonna win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on the college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, let's talk a little bit about tight end recruiting and why it's important, even though Florida State just got like Landon Thomas last year. They flipped from Georgia. Why do you need an elite tight end in this class? 2 prime reasons I'm going to give you, and this could solidify Florida State once again having a top 10 class, which I quite frankly think they're going to. Here's the biggest thing. When you stack talent at a position, you can use it to just bludgeon another team, especially if they don't have players to cover them. Big tight ends that can catch, and Landon certainly is one of those. He's a 6'5" kid. They make a difference in today's game, whether inline, H-back, fullback, split out, or in the slot. You move them all around. The more they learn in terms of the playbook, the more likely they are to be an impactful player. I think Landon will play pretty early at tight end for the Noles, although I don't think he'll necessarily be an inline blocker right away. He'll certainly get plenty of reps. If they can get somebody like Elias Williams, Chase Lofton, the kid out of Nebraska, I just texted with him a minute ago. He hadn't set any visits yet. He's getting close, but no visit dates for Chase. If they can get somebody like that, that's a pass catcher, that's fine. Elias can play DN or whatever he wants. He might be the best tight end in the country. Marshall Pritchett. There's several other guys too. If they can just get one of those to go with Landon, it changes your offense, and it means you can also go back to running more 12 personnel, which is something Norvell likes to do. But 12 personnel is really something you got to put an asterisk by for every team, and especially somebody like Norvell that's so good at scheming up, as my friend Bud Elliott likes to say. You have to be able to respect Florida State, even in 12 personnel, coming out and running 4 wide because their tight ends can play in the slot. That's what they caused problems with last year. Jaheim, like some of these guys they had, even Biscuit you could want because he can catch with a burner, but he could catch the football and he could block outside. When you have those kinds of situations, teams have to respect you in a multitude of ways, and it puts them in a bind. How do they find a way to match up with you? 2 tight end set to me is the most dangerous in college football. If at least one of them is a true pass catcher, and Florida State always has one of those guys. So that makes a difference. Also, it helps you in the run game, and Florida State runs a lot of gap. They'll do a lot of different things where tight end will come down and block, wham blocks, etc. So they need numbers. Again, if they can get any of the 3 I mentioned, or maybe somebody else, and add it to Landon Thomas in back-to-back classes, that would be huge for Florida State. Also, just from a generic perspective, to get a top 10 class, 2 things to think about between now and the end of March, and even first week or so of April, as we get spring ball going here in the next week or so. They have to get these kids on campus in a very short order. I was curious to how Florida State set up their spring ball, and I'm guessing, I have no idea on this, but I'm guessing they started spring ball later than pretty much everybody else in the country because they had so many guys out after this past season with injury. They wanted them a little more time to heal. I get it. The downside to that, although obviously got to take care of your own players, is a lot of other schools have had these kids on campus to see practices. It's one thing to have an unofficial visit. That's great, but it's better when you got practice because they can see what you're about, how coaches act. It makes it a little bit easier, in my opinion, to get those kids to come back for official visits. Is it huge? Depends on the player, to be honest, but it would certainly help. So the next couple of weeks, once spring ball starts, they got to hammer the unofficial visits. And kids saying they're going to come is one thing. It's actually seeing them do it. What you say is not as important what you do, because when they come, that's your best chance to solidify an OV for May and June. That's bottom line. You don't get OVs, you don't get kids. Florida State is in the mix for this top 10 class, and this next couple of weeks will be huge. So anytime you see somebody, whether it's myself, 247 or whatever, say, hey, somebody's going to visit, that's a big deal. They need these kids on campus for these spring visits. Otherwise, they're not going to sign them. So right now, again, I think Florida State's on track to have a top 10 recruiting class. The offensive side of the ball today is what I talked about. I'm going to talk about the defense tomorrow. But this is a very, very good group, and I think that it's trending in the right direction. Florida State's gaining more traction with kids in South Florida, Atlanta, even in the state of Alabama. Like getting Alvin Henderson on campus is not easy. You're recruiting Alabama is really, really hard. Even with the coaching change in Tuscaloosa, that state, it's just a different deal. This is a good sign for Florida State, and I am all in on Florida State ending up with a top 10 recruiting class. Please share and like this podcast, and make sure that you have a chance to comment. If you got a question about somebody that's being recruited by Florida State or somebody else, what goes on in recruiting or anything else related to the Noles, please leave a message on YouTube, and I'll be happy to talk about it. Also, finally, there's a lot of recruiting stuff coming up, so you're going to see more recruiting information right here at Locked On Seminoles. Everybody have a great day. Thank you very much.